Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Um, and welcome to Advancing Tech Careers in Times of Uncertainty. This is one of potentially many future offerings by Segal Coaching LLC for the tech industry. We're excited to be entering this space and partnering with Cecilia and Rachel, our panelists today. I just mentioned really quickly, we're going to be recording. We are recording right now. So this will be available to participants later on if you want to go back and share it or reference this at any future time. Any questions you have at any time, just go ahead and put them in the chat box all throughout the event. At the end, we'll make sure to do a Q&A as I just mentioned before we started recording. That'll be in the final 15 minutes. So we're going to take a quick poll of our webinar participants. Emery, if you could put up that poll. This is an anonymous poll. We'll have our participants enter their answers here. And what we're driving at here is we really want to know who's in the room. So we're going to tailor our discussion for those folks. And you'll see, you know, most of the people are taking part in this webinar because they or someone they know have been impacted directly by layoffs in the tech industry, or they're looking to switch roles into or within the tech industry, or they were looking to get promoted within the tech industry. So it looks like we don't have too many of those. Oh, there goes one. So we have a pretty broad distribution, but a lot more on the first two. I'll give it another sort of 20 seconds here, 15 seconds here to make sure everyone gets to vote that's entered. But this is super helpful to us to just make sure that we're, you know, tailoring our answers and the discussion for maximum usefulness.
So we have all but one who's answered. Now all but two, someone else joined. I'll turn it off and poll and you'll see the results.
Great. So, you know, it's a sign of the times, really, you know, really difficult out there in the tech industry. Lots of people know people or have been affected directly by layoffs. And, you know, we're gonna really lean into that uncertainty and talk about how to turn it into that turmoil into opportunity. There's also some folks here that are looking to switch roles within the tech industry or into the tech industry. We'll answer their questions too. So that's really helpful. Thanks everyone for filling out the poll. I want to get started with our introductions of our panelists today. I'm so pleased to be joined by Cecilia and Rachel, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So just a bit about Cecilia. Cecilia Ziniti advises companies and leads teams at some of the most impactful technology companies in the world today. She serves as general counsel and the head of business development at Replit, a provider of software development and AI services used by 22 million plus developers globally. Replit recently raised a Series B at a $1 billion plus valuation. She is in hiring mode across a range of roles. So, you know, we'll make sure to get back to that in our discussion. Before Replit, Cecilia founded and led Ziniti Law PC, advising venture-backed technology leaders, including a health tech unicorn, a global ed tech company, and an HR tech SaaS provider. An experienced general counsel and advisor, Cecilia launched Alexa and Echo at Amazon and served as GC for a robotics company, Anki, which was backed by Andreessen Horowitz, Index Ventures, and JP Morgan. She was also affiliated with Bloom Tech. She's a lifelong technology and consumer services enthusiast and former product manager. Cecilia lives in Silicon Valley, so welcome, Cecilia. Next up, Rachel Windzberg holds an uncommon and diverse track record of success with multiple prominent players in the tech space, including BCG, Datadog, Facebook, Instagram, Meta. Currently, she is a product lead at Arena AI, a startup that applies artificial intelligence to tackle complex enterprise problems. Rachel's diverse experience and passion for helping others succeed make her a valuable asset in the tech industry. She has been serving as a career coach for Columbia Business School for the past 4 years, where she helps MBA students prepare for careers in tech and consulting. In addition, Rachel has helped 100 plus people prepare for interviews and navigate the tech industry at various levels and verticals. She holds an MBA from Columbia University and a bachelor's in science and electrical engineering from Tel Aviv University. A quick plug here, in addition to her very busy day job, Rachel is Segal Coaching's secret weapon for interview prep. So she partners with tech clients to ace tech interviews across the industry. So please feel free to reach out to us and to Rachel. She really is a star in that area, and we're so happy to have her perspective here. My name is Paul Wagoner. I'm an executive coach, career strategist, speaker, and resume writer at Segal Coaching LLC. I'm a member of the International Coaching Federation and a candidate for certification in leadership and performance coaching at Brown University. Prior to coaching, I spent 12 plus years as a practicing attorney in the military, in private practice, and in-house, including biotech. And lastly, I want to welcome and acknowledge the indispensable support and mentorship of Anne-Marie Segal, CEO of Segal Coaching LLC. She has generously offered to monitor the chat box here for the Q&A portion of our program, which I personally very much appreciate. And lastly, Tasha Borgeli, executive assistant to Anne-Marie Segal, was critical in designing and producing and promoting this event. And so we thank her as well. So, just to get things started with our panelists here, we've discussed already the tech industry layoffs, Silicon Valley, we also want to sort of note the general climate, right? Silicon Valley Bank's failure, cooling capital markets, economic uncertainty, the very recent rise of AI, remote work in the aftermath of the pandemic. So the headwinds, as we paint this picture of what's going on in tech right now, are pretty strong. But my first question to our panelists is, what's going on in tech right now?
I can get started with that. And I think a lot of the things you've said kind of explain the overall, sorry about that, explain the overall situation in the tech industry. Sorry, my headphones failed. Can everyone still hear me well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a few things happened. So when the pandemic hit, a lot of these companies, like the banks of the world and many tech startups that had raised capital already, they were over hiring because of very rapid growth that lasted for about a year. But then after that year, what ended up happening is that they ended up having more talent than they needed to have. And another thing that was going on is low interest rates started to hiking up. So that made it harder for startups to raise funds. That made stocks of these tech companies drop, which means that issuing additional stocks is hard. And that essentially put them at a crunch where they realized they had to let some of these overhiring that they did go. The second thing that happened was that because they were hiring so rapidly, in many cases, there were misaligned incentives that created really complex organizations that are really hard to navigate. And as an anecdote, say that at Meta, for example, part of the way you get promoted into a manager or into like the second level of a manager incentivize you to build a bigger team rather to drive higher impact, which is a bit ridiculous, but that's how it works. And so in many cases, you hear people say, oh, they're building empires, not building products, but that's essentially what happened. So that are some of the things that happened that also led to inflation in titles and things like that. So that's kind of like what's been going on in the tech world. It's important to explain here that layoffs in many cases aren't a reflection of you or of your performance. I can say that I've been laid off once, and I can talk about that experience later. But it's really important to have a really good action plan and build your confidence and think about how to portray yourself in the best way possible in this job market. I'll pass this to Cecilia.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited. I'm going to try to keep it fun and light, even despite the topic. So look, yeah, you live in the world, so you know the situation, but I actually think it's a really interesting time for careers. And a lot of the stuff, I've been at a big company. I've been told before, wait in line to get promoted. Your work is good, but you're not next in line. That really happened. But the good thing about this environment is that the wheat is getting separated from the chaff, but also you have a chance to find a role that fits you and matches you. For me, that's been startups, and maybe it is for you too. But in terms of recessions, like all of us, like you've probably been practicing a decent amount of time, or even if you haven't, you're a lawyer, you're a two, or assuming we have a lot of lawyers on this call, you're a two, no, non-lawyers, very exciting. Okay, look, non-lawyers on this call. If you're diligent enough to be on this call, you're probably diligent enough to like read the news and be worried, but you probably have a perspective, and that's something that you can use. So is the tech industry in like shambles right now? Like, absolutely not. Like, I mean, AI is going crazy. SaaS multiples are down, but like, personally, I didn't think SaaS is the most exciting tech anyway. So like, you can do your own thing. The other thing is that there's so many advances in, since the pandemic, and really being your own solopreneur, to where you can leverage that to get jobs. And that'll be a theme that we'll go into. But what's happening in tech, like I don't think it's doom and gloom. And if it is doom, then like you can't bring that to a personal level. You cannot be woe is me, because people who want to hire you, or look to you to hire yourself as a solopreneur, or even for a role, they can sense that, and they want people who are focused on the future and not really the past or the present.
Well, thanks to you both. Yeah. I think what I'm hearing from you is that it's bad, but at least it's more complicated than the CW, the conventional wisdom suggests. So, Cecilia, my next question is for you. Given this sort of complicated picture that we painted, how does your advice for our audience differ in this economy versus the boom times the tech industry experienced over the last decade or so?
I don't think the advice is that different. Your yields will just be sort of smaller. So in any economy, the best job you're going to get is by being super deliberate, by networking, and by looking at your job search as any other sales process, right? So if you look at sales, the yield on, spamming neighborhoods with flyers for lawn mowing service, a good yield for that is probably 1%. And I would liken that to spamming whatever jobs that you can get, right? So that like 1% yield rate, why waste your time? A good yield rate on, I don't know, Girl Scout cookies door to door, probably more like 50, 75%, because you're tailing your things, you're in the neighborhood, you're selling something relevant, you have a story, you're probably a cute little kid. Now that's kind of a silly analogy, but the point is like the one-to-one thing, or the like having something relevant that people want. I get to say my last 3 roles were either not posted on the internet, or they were, and I absolutely didn't go through the job. I either went through a VC or a DM on LinkedIn, or, showed some value to whoever it was. At a certain level of seniority, having roles get created for you is better, because otherwise the role that you're going to have is going to be, whatever you just did. And whatever you just did, if you were in a big tech company that did a layoff, okay, that job might not be the same. Or there's also a funny phenomenon. I'm looking for the tweet, but there's a meme on Twitter about low interest rate phenomena, right? That's from the low interest times. And there was a tweet, just like Rachel said, about, at big tech companies, people had on their LinkedIn, I build teams. It's like, well, okay, that's not really like the most relevant thing. And that has somewhat gone away. Flip side, though, I can tell you that I've interviewed for roles and had people tell me, oh, you've only managed 10 people. Yeah, this one has 25. I'm like, with 10 people, I reached 22 million users, and I like argued XYZ in front of the FCC. Like, I had such depth of experience. That role wasn't right for me, actually, I realized, because that company was focusing on that. And guess what? That company's stock is down 50% since I interviewed. Shocker. And so anyways, I guess it's not that different, but I actually think in a down economy, your yield rates are going to be lower, right? So if it was fish in a barrel, you could get offers from every FANG company as a fresh MBA in low interest times. Now that's not going to happen. You have to basically, but that's okay. It's okay to have a yield rate that's okay. So a fact that was interesting for me, I started to post more on LinkedIn, and I basically realized a 4% like rate between people that view what you post and like it is smashingly good. Like 1% is like, okay, but you think 4%, like that's really bad. No. You reframe, like even the best influencers have that kind of like to exposure ratio. So I think it's, that was a lot of words. Upshot being, in a down economy, you kind of have to try harder and be more tailored. But those are the same things that if you really want to maximize your results, you have to do in a good economy as well.
Cecilia, can we stay with you just for a second? Because I think you're able to take sort of the longest view of anybody on this call. Do you have a perspective from previous downturns like the Great Recession or maybe the .com crash or anything?
Yeah, I do. So I graduated college in 2002. And when I joined college, I still very clearly remember it was 98, height of the .com. I think I majored in economics or something. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, and I was like, Dad, people in my major make $100,000, and he's like, sounds good, child. Like, like, okay. And I just remember that conversation very clearly. And then September 11th happens, I think it was Lehman Brothers crash that fall in 2001, and all that stuff. Amazon almost goes out of business. They get a line of credit from, I think, JP Morgan or something that literally keeps Amazon in business. And I graduate college and there's no jobs anywhere. And I'm a fresh grad in econ. And like, so what did I do? I did just what I said. I networked like crazy. And Georgetown University, which is where I went, they sent me a packet. It was literally like the alumni network was a packet, like with a staple. And so I find it and I email Michael Callahan, who is now a longtime GC, but at the time he was counsel at Yahoo. And I was like, I'm really interested in tech. I'm really, and long story short, I got the job. But before I got that job, I just took like a random job in sales, making $30,000 an hour, right? Or $30,000 a year, a third of what I thought. But guess what? That rando job, that was at PR Newswire. And now I run go-to-market and I write press releases, or I oversee people that write press releases. And that knowledge, that part of like the mandala of my career, like, yeah, was it 5 months that like I could have been working at Yahoo? Yeah, but it was good experience. I made money. It's easier to get a job when you have a job, all those things. So that was just more of a micro story. Since then, I think it's like, I wouldn't necessarily like limit your opportunities. So I guess bringing it back to careers, like in a down economy, you might have to get creative, do a role that isn't quite exactly what you want, but just make sure that it's additive to your career.
Great, thank you. Rachel, did you have anything to add on this point about boom times versus how it differs for how approaching your career in a down economy?
Yeah, I think what I see and hear from people that I talk to is many people make the mistake of focusing on two things. One is just updating their resume, and the second is just applying blindly to jobs. And the fact is that doing these two things are likely not going to get you a job in this economy. Maybe when the market is booming, it's helpful, but it's not going to help you right now. And I can share from my own experience. I alluded to that beforehand, but 6 years ago, I was laid off from a startup that ran out of funds. And it was November, and I was then holding an H-1B. And anybody who has been an H-1B or is on an H-1B and just looking at the calls, I suspect a few of them are here. You literally have 2 months to find a job, and it's very stressful. And November is a really hard time to find a new job. And right now is a really hard time as well. And what I realized, like, I gave myself 1 or 2 days to kind of like wallow a bit and kind of like take the news, and people with H-1Bs have less time to kind of like jump on their feet and get going. But I really didn't fall into that trap of just applying blindly. I had 5 things that I ended up doing. Networking is probably where I spent 60% of my time. Then I updated my resume and made sure that I tailor it. Use LinkedIn as a way to feed into my networking and find the right groups and be involved in the right conversations. I did a lot of interview preparation for myself. And I focused on building skills and finding classes I could take that would make me sound more knowledgeable about things that I was talking about, and just use that as an opportunity. And the job I ended up finding, which was then a startup, now an IPO company called Datadog, I found it through a connection I made through my network. I reached out to somebody from my MBA cohort and I told them, hey, I'm like, Datadog looks like a great company. Can you introduce me? And that's really how I found my job. So all of this is to say is that sending resumes blindly to applications, it creates a circuit where you feel like you're doing something, but you're also crushing your confidence and you feel like something's wrong with me. But the reality is that you're probably not being efficient and targeted enough in how you're doing it.
Thank you for that perspective. And just very quickly for those of us who don't know, what is an H-1B?
I wish I you know. H-1B is a visa that immigrants get that allows them to work. I believe it's a non-immigrant visa, even though you can get into a green card. I can speak about it a bit, but it's essentially what so essentially if you're in somebody who isn't an American or hold a green card, there are probably 3 types of visa you can work on, maybe 4. So H-1B is one of those visas.
Gotcha. Yeah, and yeah, as Cecilia put in the chat, you know, where it's tied to a particular job, and so if you lose that job, it's really it's go time. You're in trouble.
Yes.
So yeah, you know, it's pretty comforting to think of this as a time that's sort of unexceptional in the long view. I mean, I hope that it's comforting for people that are really in the thick of the emotion of this. To sort of take that long view. How should our participants think about approaching their job search?
Yeah,
Cecilia, we'll start with you. Yes, okay, go ahead.
For me, I think I sort of did it 2 ways, or have done it 2 ways. One is really looking at it like a job. So, you know, creating goals for yourself, a spreadsheet, if that's your thing, like a framework of like, what is your ideal job? Meeting lots and lots of people. And you can be sort of exploratory, but you sort of have to look at it almost like a product launch, like a funnel, right? Where, you know, business people talk about a funnel, you know, top of the funnel, exploratory, who are my customers? And then eventually it's like, okay, my customers are Series B startups with a consumer component who would probably value someone with a legal background, or like whatever it is. Like it's going to be unique for you, but it's almost like coming up with an ideal customer profile for your skills, right? So if you look at yourself as the product, and people use the like CEO of you a lot, but I actually quite agree with the approach. You're in charge of you. When you're looking for a job, you know, you don't have a boss, you don't have OKRs that other people set. It's just your own initiative. So that's thing 1. Thing 2, in general, always easier to get people to buy a free trial. So when you do work for others, I can tell you that startup CEOs, they have a million concerns on their mind. And one of the things you can do, so here's an example, one of my GC roles that I got, they basically had a public regulatory matter. It was very clear from LinkedIn, they didn't have a GC. And so sending them an email being like, hey, Austin, in this case, it was Lambda School, you know, notice that you, whatever, you know, this thing happened. You didn't ask, but here's my thoughts on whatever it is. Or, you know, another friend of mine was the first BD hire at Slack. And the way he got the job was he did a LinkedIn post about how he liked the product and he thought they should create a developer ecosystem. So what is BD? BD is creating a developer ecosystem. He was hired and he did. And, you know, he did incredibly well. But Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, very public persona, and saw the post and liked it. So if there's a company that you're targeting, you know, write a blog post about it. The internet is free. Twitter is free. All these companies are out there. In the public company context, you know, hiring managers at a particular level, they're probably sort of public or doing public marketing things. So as an example, if I was targeting, Google AI, very easy to post and see posts about it and see who the players are. You could, and everybody's human is my other thing. Like you can appeal or find anyone. And if you can't, well, that's your job. Consider it research.
Great. Rachel, anything else?
I have a few things, and I agree with everything Cecilia just said. I think a few things is how you present yourself. And I think Cecilia hit on this earlier, which unfortunately it's harder to find a job when you're already employed. And a lot of times the posts that you see on LinkedIn by people who were impacted by the layoffs aren't really serving them well. While it's really easy to feel despaired, or it's really easy to use the network for help, and maybe in some cases it works, it's like when you're dating, right? You want to look, you don't necessarily want to say, oh, I've just been dumped, right? It's not necessarily the best way to approach something. I think one is using social media in a positive way. So instead of saying, hey, I was one of the 10,000 people that were impacted by a layoff in Meta or something like that, it's like you can put out something like, I'm looking for my new challenge. These are my key accomplishments. These are my key skills. If anybody knows anyone or can share my post, I'd be grateful. That shows something that still shows you're a hot commodity. Another thing I see in people's resumes, and I also help people write their resumes sometimes, and it drives me crazy to see people writing that they were impacted by the layoffs inside their resume. Why does it drive me crazy? Because one is, it's one of the first things that somebody will end up reading about you. It's the first line that they read. They don't read about your accomplishments that you've had. It's just the first thing. And it's not that being laid off is embarrassing or anything. It's just doesn't help you start with that hopeful thing of the value that you bring. And usually you don't really write the reason you left each and every one of the jobs. So why put it in there right now in any case? So that's two things. And I think finding ways to stay motivated is another thing that's important. And understanding that even in these rough times, as much as companies are interviewing you, or when you get to that point, you're also interviewing them. So you want to make sure that you, to the best of your ability, find a place that you feel like will genuinely not is a good fit for you as well. It's still important to come to these interviews with questions of how did you get to where you are? What makes you special? All of these things that when hot market you tend to do because you have a great opportunity, why should you switch? Then you need to think about it still while you're looking for a new, while you're doing this as well. And then I also think doing research and understanding what companies are out there, because the market is not, there's a lot of stuff going on in the market. AI is rising. There's a lot of things that it's essentially going to change how we operate. And there are a lot of opportunities there. So getting educated about it, playing around with it are things that are going to help you add more value.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from both of you, I think I would call is sort of a growth mindset, cultivating curiosity to sort of overcome any doubt that you have about yourself or about, what the market looks like or whatever. So, what I'm hearing is that's an important part of the long-term career strategy and short-term. What else should we be thinking about when implementing this growth mindset as a career strategy? Rachel, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think that applying a growth mindset to me is staying curious here. And from my perspective, it's not only taking classes and practicing and being positive. It's also think about what types of books or what kind of podcasts you can listen to. I can say from my own experience is I'm a big Stratechery fan and Ben Thompson fan, if anybody knows who that is. And whenever I want to sound smart, I usually quote Ben Thompson and I say that I quote them. So and that's brought me a long way in many of those actually for my current place as well. So it's kind of don't underestimate the importance of staying in touch with what's going on in the market and finding really good credible sources to upskill and improve your knowledge and understanding of the industry.
Great. Cecilia, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, there's growth mindset and then there's actual growth, right? So for me, like staying on the cutting edge of tech and staying up on just like how modern things are has been critical. So here's an example, you know, the legal field is where I came up, so it's an easy one. But, you know, if you're looking for general counsel roles and you don't know how to use contract lifecycle management software, or you've never evaluated one, and you're looking for jobs, read up, go to some seminars, learn it. Because if you go there and they're like, have you ever implemented, you know, whatever it is, a contract management system, and you're like, no, you know, that's just like such a non-answer. I don't want to hire you. Versus you're like, oh yeah, you know, I was just at an event with, you know, with Law Trades last week, and they showed me, you know, their system. It looks really great because it blah 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 blah. You don't necessarily, and so there's both like thinking that you can grow and then actually growing. And I do see people like a little bit stuck. And I think that's something that you should feel like whatever the time between jobs, you learned something or you did something. So here's another, you know, another example is like, during my time off, I took a $400 class on Twitter. Like it's literally like, it was on the internet, super easy. It was like kind of like a master class, but it was through a platform called Maven. So I took a Maven class and it was incredibly helpful. It was good networking because it was all, you know, basically tech and startup people taking the class. And I actually learned something about like the structure of a good tweet, as an example. Class was super easy. It was like twice, you know, it was like an hour a day, or I'm sorry, an hour 2 times a week. But that skill, that's just like something else, add it to the mix. If you're in a field where that wouldn't be the case, like let's say you're a data person interviewing for data jobs, fine. But if you can be like, yeah, actually I can analyze tweet data, or I have found that, you know, if I do tweet like this, the data goes up. And guess what? You're the data person interviewing with the CMO, you just earn way more respect. So there's like both like, okay, I'm going to get myself better. I'm not good at this yet, which is like typical growth mindset stuff. And then there's like, make yourself good at more things that are relevant to people. So this gets to the sales thing, right? Like, you know, ultimately, if you're selling your services and you're not a fit, like I would not be a fit for a head of data role. Like I'd probably, you know, I could do it, it'd probably take me 6 months, but as of today, I'm not. And so then you have to think like, how can I shape myself to be that way? If you're somebody who works in, you know, I talked to somebody who worked at like an ed tech, and she was worried that like ed tech was going to be like her thing. I'm like, well, pick up something else, pick up privacy compliance, pick up, you know, core marketing skills, and, you know, transition to regular tech, you know, that kind of thing. I would be mindful of this in the super long term, you know, be mindful of it, you know, if your brand is much more, you know, one thing, if that's working for you, great. I think it is harder, you know, longer term, the more niche that is, if you don't keep adding skills.
I love what you just said about, I think, you know, I've gotten stuck in like, oh, I have a growth mindset, but it's sort of diffuse. It's not really growing. It's just sort of scattershot. Oh, I got to look into this, look into that. So that was really, that's something I took away. This question, you know, we can choose exactly who wants to answer it, but you know, as companies increasingly create you know, chief DEI officers and prioritize diversity and inclusion initiatives, are there steps that our job seekers here on the Zoom today can take to demonstrate their commitment to these values and otherwise differentiate themselves in the hiring process?
Are you talking about how you can you explain the question again on the DEI side? I think I missed the context.
No problem. So, you know, companies are prioritizing DEI, or seem to be. Maybe that's changing a little bit, but we can talk about that. But are there steps that our candidates here can take to differentiate themselves while also demonstrating their commitment to those principles?
So one of the things that I've been doing a lot at Meta was one of the things that I actually enjoyed the most was I was part of a DEI initiative called Loop Guide. So what I would do is I would guide people from diverse backgrounds through their interview processes, and that helped me build my skills as somebody who helps people prepare for interviews, but it also helped me understand some of the insecurities that being from a diverse background can bring, and help me understand how I can treat people better, and how I can help people grow themselves. So for me, it's been something that's been rewarding for me, and it's something that helped me grow my career, not necessarily in terms of moving up, but in terms of the breadth of my career, because that was essentially the step that I took from going from helping people prepare at Columbia to helping people prepare at Meta as something that I do in additional to my day job there. And it's part of my paid component. Like I was a product manager. That's what I mostly did, like 90% of the time, but that 10% of the time gave me joy, and it gave me a skill that is now kind of like somewhat of a side hustle. So it's kind of like, I see that these things can help you be more diversified in your network, but it can help you build compassion, and it can help you be able to work maybe with a more diverse set of people as well. I don't know if this answers your question, by the way.
No, yeah, definitely.
I see it as I think it's called doing well by doing good. And I truly believe in that.
Cecilia, do you have any thoughts on that, or
yeah,
move on if you don't?
I don't disagree. Like, it sounds like it was a great strategy for Rachel. Personally, I have not found diversity or pushing or like mentioning diversity before you have a sale. In other words, like before you're sort of at the offer type of process, to be a good strategy. Like let me just be super blunt. Like that is different. Times are different since your 2020s, and you're like, diversity being at least a stated corporate priority. You can look at the numbers. There's a CEO of a company that tracks essentially biased language in JDs, and in the last year,
Which are job descriptions. Yeah.
In the last year, it's gone way up. And I just think it's risky. Like, to me, it's much more like, what are the skills that you bring to the table? What have you done? If you've had opportunities through affinity groups, or through like the AAPI bar, as an example, has a 100 GCs of Fortune 500 companies initiative, which is like amazing. And they do really substantive trainings on it. They're like, okay, here's how you do an IPO, here's how you do whatever it is. And if you can get experience that way, it's much more the experience than the DEI, for me. And I don't mean that as a discouragement. I mean that purely from a pragmatic perspective. Like, that's what I've found, works for me. And doing, once you're in, then you're in, as Rachel mentioned. But during the actual process, I wouldn't actually advise focusing on it.
So what I'm hearing is maybe there's, if one of the skills you're showcasing is leadership, being the president of the affinity group is more valuable than being a general member and having nothing to talk about in an interview.
Yeah. Or if they did if they give free resources around, upload your elevator pitch, or learning your social media presence, or accounting for accounting, like whatever the point is, like it gets back to that growth and skill thing. But yeah, in terms of, I think you asked another question. Go ahead, sir.
Oh no, I think that was it. Did we actually, one last question for you, Cecilia, before we go to our Q&A here. Do you want to talk about how to think about risk in terms of balancing short-term goals versus long-term career planning?
Yeah, so I can forward it around in the post materials if you like, but Molly Graham, she's a great follow. She's my former, I worked with her very closely in a former role. She was very early Facebook and then COO of a company that got acquired. And she talks about this concept of a J curve where, a normal career thing you might think of, a step ladder, right? You're a product manager, you're an entry level product coordinator, then you're, an associate product manager, then you're whatever product manager, then you're a senior product manager, then you're, up and up and up. And people at FANG companies have heard, the N from Sundar, right? My N from Sundar is 6, which I'm like, first of all, the fact that that term exists is sort of ridiculous. But second of all, like, oh, that's depressing. But anyways, that presupposes a step, right? So the concept that she has in this article, and which I agree with, is that occasionally you're going to have to take a jump down to be able to do a J and jump up. And she basically makes the concept that it's like you might go down, whatever, and you're a little more meandering and not that very clear ladder step. If you're a person with a very clear ladder step and it works for you, go for it. That's, low risk. But I do think there's like a high risk, high reward scenario where, for me, perfect example, I was at Amazon and I was an L6 for people who know what that means. Got promoted to L7, left just before the promotion was effective. So whatever, that was on me, but I did that. But I left for a job that was a director of legal role for a pay cut. But the folks that I know who are at Amazon, who are my peers, they have bigger orgs than I have had now, but they're not GCs. And so like, I knew that I wanted that. So I had to take that step down to step up. So, you have to be comfortable with that risk. And I can't tell you that it hasn't been painful. Like at different points, I've looked and been like, oh gosh, that person backfilled me and now they have this huge org. But the variety of skills that I've had and the experience that I've had, I've enjoyed it more, whatever. So, the other thing I want to say on that is like, there's no silver bullet, like it doesn't exist. Like, and so like your own career happiness and your own growth, like use the tools that you have. That's how I'd look at it. But the other thing on risk, I don't know, Anne-Marie, if you had something more on that, but that's what I would say.
Hi, I was referring to the idea of taking risk in your career. When we did the workshop last time, I remember you talking to some participants about how to get comfortable with risk and taking risks.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who are very diligent as a general matter, you might not want to take that J curve, or might not want to go for a job that's not quite exactly what you want. But if you don't take that risk, you're gonna be at those little, the little ladder steps, and eventually the pace will slow. So to me, that's kind of what I meant. Also, just like, at different points in your career, maybe you can take more risk than otherwise, right? Like if you've got a spouse who's working, or if you're in an H-1B situation, or not, like these are factors, and that's okay. Like you can be very real with yourself of like, hey, I can't afford to do the startup thing right now. I need to, work and make money, or I need to have a job where I'm going to feel pretty good about my work most of the time. Does that make sense? I want to get to the networking question though. I'm like seeing it in the chat.
Yeah, so that's a great transition here. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
One thing I would add, and especially in this economy where many companies are hiring less, sometimes taking risk isn't necessarily about taking a step down in terms of a title wise or scope. Sometimes it means going to a startup instead of, waiting for those companies. So I think there are usually like 3 or 4 things that you end up balancing between when you're making a career choice, right? You have your title, you have your compensation, you have your scope, and you have the brand. I think these are like the 4 things. And in many cases, you can only get 2 or 3 of these things. And you need to decide what your own trade-offs and prioritization is, whether you're looking for a job and you don't have a job right now and you don't necessarily want to wait for the first thing that comes up. Or if you already have a job and you're looking to make a transition, you need to understand what is the trade-off. Maybe 1 in 100 times you're going to be very lucky and all the stars align. But in many cases, it's going to be 2 or 3 out of the 4 factors that I just mentioned. And some people have their own priorities as well. So it's just like clarifying what your priorities are what is important to you more or less, and understanding how whatever position you're looking at maps to that.
Great. So we're going to shift to the Q&A portion of our program as promised. Our first question, would love tips on networking in case you haven't kept in touch with old coworkers, advice on what to say.
Yeah, I can take this one. Yeah, so 3 things. 1, treat it like keeping in touch with old friends. So you must have in your personal life, or maybe it's you, but somebody who's pretty good about keeping in touch. Either they send a holiday letter or they text random times. I would look at professional stuff fairly similarly. So if you see something that reminds you of someone that you worked with, send it along. So, perfect example, like I was involved in Google I/O this week, and lots of former colleagues were in some way involved. So very easy to send a text, send a quick LinkedIn note, like, hey, I saw, work that you worked on at Google I/O, it looks great. Or, startups get funded, you can get in touch with people that way. I mean, the randomness of how you find people is pretty high. So keep in touch, treat it like keeping in touch with old friends. 2, a lot of people set a schedule for it. So you can go to LinkedIn, and I personally use LinkedIn as like my CRM, but back to the like sales metaphor, it's good to have a system, and you can have it like a CRM, and you can literally just like scroll your LinkedIn and be like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about that person in a while. And then like you click on their thing and you can see whatever it is they're doing. And you can be like, hey, it's been a couple of years, I haven't heard from you. Like I can show you an example now. I haven't been at Cruise for 3 years, but I saw that someone there that I worked with, an engineering manager, had just left. And I was like, oh, Tracy, I really enjoyed XYZ project. It's been a while, but it was super fun to do whatever project we had worked on. Person responded right away. It was like, oh my gosh, great to hear from you. I'm at XYZ company now. If I'd have known, I would have considered yours, kind of thing. And that's like one more sort of card in the deck of like, I'm not hiring a site reliability manager now, but I'm sure I eventually will be. And so just like keep the cards in the deck kind of fresh would be a way that I would do it. And it doesn't have to be anything like profound. Like this was just like a nice little note. So like that was it. The other thing, you can use ChatGPT for that. You can say, I'm writing a note to keep in touch with an old coworker. We worked on a project called X, and ChatGPT will write it for you. So that's another little tip. And then the third like networking tip, I'm definitely the third networking tip is like have like I call it the happy life principle. Whoever you're networking with, they're very busy. So if you're asking for something, either have a give or make it very easy for them. Like, oh, let's grab coffee. Like I can't afford the $7 myself. Like the $7 is not going to do it for me. It's like, literally, I'm at a point where meeting somebody live, it's a pretty high bar. Like I go into the office twice a week. I'm a mom, whatever. Like I'm not going to certainly not going to drive somewhere far to have coffee with you. But like, there's a recruiter that I keep in touch with, which keeping in touch with recruiters is another good advice, even when you have a job. But anyways, there's a recruiter that I keep in touch with, and she proposed a lunch, and she's like, what's the place you want to go? She arranged it with my EA. We met like exactly there. It was just down the hill from my house, like way easier. So it's just like observe the happy life principle and ideally try to be useful. And it might mean giving a Calendly, or it might mean like if the person says meet at 8 a.m., you meet at 8 a.m., like whatever it is that's easy for them.
I would add to that networking, like that's a great approach for people that but sometimes to expand your networking, you need to also broaden it beyond and start cold calling people. So figuring out how to set those times. I think like three things that I think are important is like, one, start with a list of roles and a list of companies that you're interested, and understanding who in your network looks like that, who in your network is similar to you and has made a transition into that company or into that role, or recently joined, kind of like understand how they're portraying themselves, understand their story a bit. When you actually cold call, like make it easy to Cecilia's point, to chat with you and have a very clear ask and a potential give. And then those new cold call opportunities that actually respond to you, cultivate that relationship. I have somebody who I've been unofficially mentoring for the past, I want to say 8 months, and she does a fantastic job of reaching out to me every once in a while with like a little nugget of information that she thinks is going to be useful for me, an article that is useful for my professional growth, or something about cats because she knows that I really like cats, for example. So it's kind of like building that relationship, and then at some point maybe I'll be able to help her, maybe not, but she's keeping that relationship warm, and I try to do the same with my mentors. So that's kind of like starting that cold call, but also preserving those relationships long term by giving something, to Cecilia's point.
Great. So we're getting a little tight on time. We're going to move to the lightning round. So one of the questions is ideas on creative ways of finding jobs in this competitive market. 1 minute for each of you.
Yeah, it also ties with one of the other questions about writing blogs. So creative way is to give a free sample of your work. So you're a marketing manager, you find a startup and you say, hey, I noticed the flow for this particular purchase sequence is, could use some updates. I mocked up some updates. Simple as that. Or you're a lawyer. Hey, the example I gave before, or you write a blog, like you don't have to start a blog. You can do it as a LinkedIn post. So for example, if you're looking, if you're a data analyst, really love how Snowflake added XYZ new feature. I guarantee people will find it. So that's one thing, or you can send it, you can send it to them, but the internet, everybody is on the internet. So it's not hard to find people. So that's my creative tip is to sort of start off giving a free sample of your work to whoever it is that you're selling to.
Similar to what Cecilia said, but I'll move it a bit to the direction of building in public. So if you're building a skill, showing your skills off in public. Actually, one of the designers at my company at Arena, he's this 20-year-old wizard without really an official education or official certifications in design. He decided he was going to start designing it every day on Twitter. He would post his designs, and he's very talented. And it turned out that the girlfriend of our CEO picked up on him and sent an intro, and that's how he got his job, by building in public. And he wasn't doing this, by the way, for a few days. He was doing that for months, but he kept on at it. So I think being able to show the skills that you're building, especially for the creatives among you, is something very helpful. Or for people who are looking into tech or looking into product management, start building something on the side and share how you're working towards it. Sometimes it helps draw the positive attention to what you're doing.
Great. So we've got just a couple more questions here. Again, we're in the lightning round. But how do you talk about a career sabbatical during interviews? Rachel, maybe this one's good for you as our interview expert.
When are you asking, should you take a career sabbatical, or should you, what is the question?
The question from the audience is, how do you talk about taking a career sabbatical during interviews?
I think I haven't really, okay, let me my thoughts. I think career sabbaticals are becoming more and more prominent in the world. People take them for whatever reason, when it's a downturn, when it isn't. People during the pandemic, one of my friends was an engineering manager at Meta, taking 2 years off from work, and he actually did that. And he's just recently, went back and got an amazing position at one of the biggest companies that acquisitions in the market. So I think people keep on looking for the spinach in their teeth instead of focusing on the value. If you take a career sabbatical, it means that you had the luxury of taking some time off, or it means that you were curious to explore something, or you wanted to travel. It just means that you're a person and that you're a whole person. I don't think you need to deflect, but if somebody says, oh, I see you've been out of the market, you can say, yes, I decided I wanted to take time off, or yes, I was impacted by layoffs, but I'm using this time to build my skills, build my network, and travel the world. It's always about being able to show the positive things and the action-oriented self, and not just moping around. And, I have nothing against looking around. If that's what you're doing, that's fine. It's just not necessarily what you want to say in an interview. Well,
Thank you to our panelists. We are going to wrap up for the day. I can't thank you enough. I'm going to pass it over to Anne-Marie Segal for some closing remarks here.
Oh, I'm just excited. Great job. And I didn't have to do very much. This is awesome. Cecilia, you are hiring. That's so exciting. I know
That's right.
you're not going to just like be able to take everyone on this webinar into your company, but it does show positivity in the marketplace. So I do want to put that out there. But Paul, I'll leave it for you to close. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Cecilia. And thank you, Paul and Tasha as well.
Just as a quick pause, since Cecilia is hiring, Cecilia, what positions are you hiring for?
Yeah, so I'm in the lucky position to run go-to-market. So I have 5 marketing roles. I have a senior product marketing manager, a lifecycle marketing manager, a developer advocate, and a tech writer. And I think the 5th go-to-market role, I have a support manager. So if anybody's amazing at support, it does require coding experience. And then, but more generally, the company, we just raised our Series B extension. So we just finished doing like the budget. So we're going to be doubling the size of the company, and we're 80 people now. So I have pretty good visibility, and I get a referral if you, well, actually, no, I don't. But anyways, I would be delighted to match somebody up. Definitely need somebody in the data side. A couple of people mentioned data experience. And then security, I think security engineering, platform engineering, lots of like we're a developer tools company. So it is pretty, hard on the tech. But I think there's also 2 product manager roles. So anyways, check out the page. The other thing I would say is like of those, 80 roles or whatever, only maybe 20 of them are posted, which to me gets even further at the networking point. Because if you land in somebody's lap and, increasingly the more senior you get, it's like find a hole shaped like you is like the advice. But yes, good stuff. Yes. Yeah. The valuation is very exciting.
Yeah. What is it? And what was the valuation for the Series B? Remind me.
It was 1.16. It just kind of worked. That's how the math worked out. But yeah, it was our unicorn kind of thing. But it also, we're the same company we were like a week ago or whatever before we announced it. It's like, you know what's next, like figure out what you like about the business, and and sometimes it's a risk and sometimes it's not.
So step 1, call Rachel, have her help you with interviews for all our job seekers here. And step 2, get in touch with Cecilia and see if she can make some magic. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Anne-Marie Segal. Thank you to everyone who organized this event. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all our participants. We hope it's been valuable.